extremely excited to have all the esteemed panelists here from different enterprises, giving a different view on the adoption within enterprise. Because obviously there's the whole hype around cryptocurrency, but the real adoption eventually comes from governments, enterprises, and essentially the entire layer throughout the society, right? So what we'd like to do today is kind of take you through some examples of where enterprise blockchain works, and to also kind of do a reality check on where enterprises are in terms of the implementation of blockchain. So I'd like to first give a little bit of an introduction to myself and to all the speakers so that you have a reference of where everybody is from. And also I'd like to ask all the speakers to quickly highlight what you currently do in enterprise blockchain so that you all have a frame of reference to stick to. And I'll make sure at the end we have a 5 minutes time for questions as well, so that you can get excited about whatever you'd like to hear from the panelists. So quickly about myself, I'm the founder and CEO of BuildBlocks Group based in Singapore. And we, out of the Netherlands, we have 23 solution architects building blockchain solutions for large enterprise. So we built for Shell. I worked within Shell for a long time. FedEx, BASF, Bosch, Daimler we recently onboarded. So kind of have a good idea of how enterprise blockchain is currently being developed. And then I'd like to start with you, Fernando. What are you doing on enterprise blockchain? And a quick introduction about yourself and your company.
Okay. First of all, sorry about my voice, but the air condition kills me here. So nowadays a cybersecurity company. My background, since 11 years old, I started actually by writing a computer game, and then cybersecurity, and then became a CTO for large corporations, small. And then with two of my co-founders, we decided really to have a go and see how could we fix some things in cybersecurity. So what we do is really provide cybersecurity for enterprises, governments, intelligence agencies, pretty much for everyone, really. You know?
Thank you. Okay, we'll just follow the sequence through, please. Yep.
Excellent, thank you. No, thank you, Yuri, and thank you to all my esteemed panelists. I think this is an incredible, oh, levels? You can't hear me? Check, check, 1, 2, check. 3, 4. Can you guys hear me? In the back? Wahid, Ithnain, Thalatha. Okay, good. Yeah, no, thank you. Sorry, I unplugged my mic because I didn't want everyone to hear what I was saying for the past 20 minutes. Yeah, my name is Hamdan Azhar. I'm Chief Data Scientist at Blockchain Technologies Corporation. I think it's, you know, I'm a data scientist by training. I used to work at a social networking site called Facebook. And many years ago, I ran into Nick Spanos on a political campaign. And that was my introduction to the world of blockchain. I think, you know, a lot of our work is frankly teaching people what blockchain is, because I think even in a gathering as august as this one, I think many of us would have a hard time explaining what is blockchain to a 6-year-old, because there's a lot of hype around blockchain. And I think especially on a topic as interesting as enterprise blockchains, I think we really have to keep in mind the bigger picture, which is that whenever a new technology comes out that has the potential to change the world and change the fate of humanity as we know it, there are levels that we go through. And the first level is inevitably they ignore you. And I think that's the stage we were in. Austin Alexander is in the audience, played a big role in starting Bitcoin Center in New York, which was the first exchange anywhere. And first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you. And then one day you wake up and they're copying you. And all the biggest companies in the world have gotten into blockchain, and every day it's a new headline, IBM, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. And I think this is a very profound moment where we need to take a step back and reflect and ask ourselves, you know, a lot of people are excited because they feel validated. But I think we can take a step back more critically and ask ourselves, is this really good? Because after they copy you, then they try to destroy you. That's when the real test comes, because they try to co-opt you. They take over the nomenclature of your movement. They claim that they're the ones who had the idea all along, which is, you know, it's not true in many cases. These guys might try to tell you I'm the founder of Libra. That is not true.
Yes,
I want to preempt that because I heard them talking.
We need a blockchain for this.
But we can talk more about that later. But yeah, I think we have a very interesting conversation ahead of us. And thank you. Please.
George.
George.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jorge Sebastiao, originally from Portugal. Then I moved to Canada, studied there and did my first 10 years of work. Originally as a mathematician, eventually moved into IT as primary profession, 20 plus years in cybersecurity. Usually people sometimes call me their seat belt. But primarily if we get back into the world of blockchain, especially enterprise blockchain, for the last 20 plus years I've been working on what we call digital transformation. And digital transformation is really about bringing technology to business, government, enterprises, and make use of this technology for practical use cases. And you can say, although I may have started with punch cards, you can say block technology is now a newer technology that enables new business models and extra efficiencies that are extremely important. And we'll give some examples as we go through the panel. So it's very exciting times. And it's exciting times not just about blockchain itself, is how you combine blockchain technology with other existing technologies, because blockchain being a technology of trust, it adds extremely important value to the IT ecosystem.
Thank you, Jorge. Petar.
So my name is Peter. I work, what we've got up here, I'm the Futurist-in-residence at Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, and of course the aim there is to provide faster than air, cheaper than ground transportation, both in passengers and in freight. The enterprise solution that we're looking at specifically in blockchain there is about a totally seamless experience, from having the idea of wanting to wake up and go somewhere else to having an experience that's very unlike the experience that we have today. If you imagine that by the time you get to, let's say, an airport, you must have booked your tickets beforehand in order to capitalize on a cheaper ticket and so on. When you look at this new system of ground transportation, but that's actually faster than flight, what that enables then is the possibility of using blockchain in what I feel are the two most interesting use cases. The first being obviously in payments, and the second one in digital identification. So imagine a seamless experience where you wake up, you decide to take a train or whatever vehicle to the central station, and then the experience of what we have currently is a closed system that you open through payment and through authentication. So imagine a system that remains open and is only closed if you don't pay or if you're not who you say that you are. So we imagine an experience at Hyperloop Transportation Technologies where you can get onto inside the station and walk from the point that you're into all the way into the Hyperloop itself, into the pod, and to sit on your seat and be taken to where you need to get to. So that's my second job. My first job is I'm a partner at a company called Black, and Black is a design and innovation advisory that specializes in really rationalizing use cases in the government and in enterprise of adapting emerging technologies to some of the use cases that they have. And I think there's an important challenge in this market at the moment. And what I've been noticing and listening earlier today, that the biggest challenge that I think we face here is not whether technology works, but in how that technology can be rationalized to solve real challenges within both government and large organizations. So we'll be talking more about that.
Thank you, Peter. So who better to ask than Amol when it comes to payments and banking? Please.
Thank you. My name is Amol. As you can read on the screen out there, I'm the only financial institution here, the bank. My specialization has predominantly been on the payment side. I call myself payment specialist. Yeah, I mean, when we're speaking about blockchain, I think payments is one of the most abused use case. I would rather call it, because everyone wants to get into that particular field and wants to offer efficiency. A classic example, I mean, how far is Oman here, and how long would you take to drive? You'll probably reach there in 3 hours, but then if you have to send the money, I would need 24 hours, at least. So there are definitely technologies, and blockchain is like any other technology. I would rather say may not be in a very nascent stage. It used to be a few years ago, but then I think we are yet to we are yet to see a classic value coming out of this particular technology, and I'll have my views on it in a short time.
Yeah, very excited because we have a diverse set of people over here. So I'd like to jump a little bit further on these use cases that you already got into, Petar. So you said payments and digital identity. So obviously when you look at use cases, they need to make sense. Enterprises, they have a limited mandate and budget to develop blockchain, and they need to fight for their right to get a higher mandate and budget, right? So they need somehow a quick win. But with a nascent technology like blockchain, that is difficult, right? So I'd like to get into the use cases that right now, at this day and age, 2019, the end, are making sense, and where you see that real traction is happening. So get a little bit more into the examples that you see within your company or within your clients. Fernando.
So I think at the moment we're facing an issue in terms of providing a blockchain that is serviceable, you know, with SLAs. Can you name a blockchain or someone who's providing a blockchain service with SLA? I can only think about IBM with Hyperledger. You know, if you go try to sell something to a big enterprise, they have to get SLAs. You know, who's providing those SLAs at the moment? Yeah, they might experiment with, you know, some of the blockchains out there themselves, but you know, it's like you said, most of them, they like just buy the package from someone. You know, so there is an issue at the moment. Yeah. The use cases, well, you know, in terms of what we do at Nawar is, you know, we use blockchain and AI to actually look for consensus and immutability and just changing the way cybersecurity is approached today, you know, which is about validation, health status of devices, etc. Yeah? So some of the use cases not particularly relevant to cybersecurity that I've seen that I really like. And I'm going to stick with something that is completely new that I was looking at recently, is somebody that is actually producing a blockchain that addresses a lot of the issues around quantum computing. So it's a quantum blockchain entanglement, yeah, which means the blocks only live in time and not in space. So only the current block exists. So it makes it quite difficult then to break it, yeah? And now we think about how you're going to use that. You know, that's quite strong. You know, in terms of the use cases, I mean, there's so many around the supply chain. You know, we know a lot of those cases. But again, we were talking earlier about supply chain here. You need to be careful because 3D printing is advancing quite fast. You know, so supply chains and logistics are going to change.
More localized.
More localized. You know, car manufacturers will have a printer in the background printing, I don't know, suspensions, you know, so why would they need a blockchain for supply chain or logistics, you know? So you need to be very careful as well what you're doing because you don't want to get a technology that's going to be obsolete in a couple of years' time, yeah? Yeah, so I like particularly some of the things that people are doing in terms of food, yeah?
Yep.
I mean, I really like that, you know, where that fish that you are eating, which boat fish, you know, caught that fish, you know, and where, you know. That's, for me, it's brilliant, you know. I really value, because a lot of times we don't know what we are eating today, you know.
Make that transparent, right?
Yeah, make transparent is absolutely essential, you know.
Yep. So we're hearing supply chain with a little critical note here as well. We're hearing payments, digital identification. Any others?
Actually, oh, no, I'm going to sound a contrarian note, so you should say some good things first.
We'd love to hear a contrarian view, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
please.
I mean, I think with all the emphasis on enterprise adoption in our industry, I just worry that we might be confusing ourselves and the public in that historically enterprises are often big companies are often the last to get on the train of innovation. Innovation in many cases begins in people's garages, and it begins in basements, and it begins with people who the world thinks are crazy, essentially. Nick talks about the Wright brothers, and when they wanted to build their airplane, the whole town thought they were crazy. Like, they literally wanted to lock them up. because they said, you think we're going to fly in these large contraptions and everyone's going to be able to get around the country so seamlessly? And they thought they were crazy. And I think when we turn to big institutions, they often end up rewriting history to make it seem that they were actually there all along. And I mean, I can't share too much about Facebook and Libra, but I will share a very small anecdote, which is in 2014, we had the first blockchain reading group at Facebook in New York. And we had a monthly session where we would come and we would discuss papers and innovations in the field. And I think Nick Spanos was the second speaker in, I think, February of 2014. And back then, I had to hide it from my coworkers that I was involved in blockchain and Bitcoin, because they thought it's crazy. They said, this is never going to work. It's never going to be adopted. It's for drug dealers and it's for people who are doing illegal activities. And we don't want anything to do with it. And you can have this small conference room in a corner with no windows and you can have a meeting, but don't tell anyone about it. Don't keep it very small and very quiet. And now, all of a sudden, 5-6 years later, Facebook is now touting itself as a leading innovator in blockchain and cryptocurrency and decentralization. And, we are almost having history rewritten in our minds. Like, oh, wow, Facebook, they've been working on blockchain for years. And IBM and Goldman Sachs and KPMG and all these companies. When actually, these companies were the last to get on the train. And they only got on it when they had to, when the market was, when they couldn't, they needed it. And even when they got on, the contrarian perspective is that a lot of it is hype. I would advise people to do their research. And just, a big company that has a blockchain division with 100 engineers, that's a press release, and their stock price jumps up. I think big companies and ICOs, there's not a lot of difference between them. They're all in a game where they're trying to put on appearances. And I think we really have to go back to the roots of our industry, which is decentralization. It's taking power away from big entities. It's not requiring people to be subject to the whims of middlemen and to the whims of giant corporations that dictate how we spend our lives, how we make friends, how we search for information, what types of media we consume, what types of devices we use. There are like 5 or 6 companies that control a lion's share of the time we spend in our days. And that's scary to me personally. And I think blockchain historically was a bulwark. I think that's the word. A bulwark. It stood up against that. And I think we really have to tell those stories and return to those roots. So I don't know if that has nothing to do with the topic, but that's frankly my contrarian perspective.
Thank you so much. I'd like to get a little bit more specific, Jorge, yes. Because when we look at blockchain projects, right, that are being run within your enterprise or within the projects that you work with, if you look at defining and sort of developing and building these projects, what have you seen successful? Yeah, what is like realistically been successful?
Let me first start 3 or 4 quite important things. First, I like to differentiate between blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Sometimes people get the two confused, and that's a terrible thing to do. Blockchain is a technology that is used to implement cryptocurrencies, not the other way around. Because blockchain is a quite sophisticated technology, it has many applications, or it has features that enable those applications. And these features are decentralization, these features are trust, identification, smart contracts, and many others, but these are a few. So when you take these features and you try to implement them in the context of an enterprise, and here I would like to add another thing that's important about enterprise. There's really 3 types of enterprises. Mm-hmm. There's enterprises that are SMEs, which is the new ones that change the world, and they create something that was not before, and they revolutionize, they make the other ones disappear. There's governments, which are very large enterprises, and they operate what we do every day. And then there's the large enterprises, monolithic, and if they don't do something, they also disappear over time, as we see. So I'm going to try to give you 3 examples of blockchain in those contexts. So let me start first how we add value. There's always 2 ways to add value, what I call above the line and below the line. Add value below the line means you create new value to the business that was not there before. That means you generate new revenue potential. Mm-hmm. Add value below the line means you save money to the business. That means you have substantial savings, and I'll try to highlight those. So let's first start with SMEs. One good example about the usage of blockchain technology is in the usage of tokenization. Tokenization and fractional ownership allows everybody to participate in the economy where otherwise they would have been disenfranchised. That means somebody which has even 1 dirham or $1 can be the owner of a piece of art or a very expensive car. And if that car or that piece of art or that real estate goes up in value, their dollar becomes, or their dirhams becomes 1.2, 1.3. That's extremely game-changing. The small enterprises that implement this are changing the world dramatically today. The second example is a government example. There's a large project going on in Malaysia. Malaysia is highly dependent on tourism. If there is any kind of issues in tourism, they lose one of their key sources of revenue, similar like Dubai. So they're using implementation of blockchain technology for their 40 or so border control points. So that means they're using blockchain as a technology of trust of people coming in and out of the country to verify them, identify them, and seamlessly allow them in and out of the country and identify risks and prevent those risks before they happen. The third one is in the telecom world. I will not specify the name of the company, but it's somewhere in Europe. Is one of the largest, if not probably the largest mobile operator. They are implementing blockchain technology, smart contracts to deal with their purchasing. So they have lots of small contracts with quantities and adjustments. The implementation of smart contracts between the purchasers and the both sides of the equation will turn for this organization savings in the neighborhood of $100 million. So these are substantial savings for a large corporation that operates in some like 40 or 50 countries.
It rationalizes the business case.
It rationalizes. That means, for example, I'll give you a specific example. Let's say you provide device, could be a cellular tower or a mobile, to this organization, and they buy hundreds or millions of them. The provider of these delivers, but sometimes they deliver a small quantity less or they don't deliver it on time. By using smart contracts, either you get penalized or you get rewarded based on the timeline. And both parties have signed digitally this contract, and this contract lives for the duration. So you no longer have to have these, nobody's gonna come and litigate you because you delivered 3 mobiles less or 3. So this automates, and that's where the $100 million saving actually turns place. So
Because
these
conditions are set in the smart contract.
That's correct. So
Automatically execute.
exactly. So here blockchain is providing quantifiable digital transformation to create new value or to optimize trust, identity management, or to actually save substantial money to the business.
So on that note, like saying that blockchain is a foundation layer, if you will, for trust between untrusted parties, right? I'm seeing use cases where competitors can actually more easily cooperate with each other by sharing goods or services that are otherwise basically standing idle, right? One of those use cases that I think blockchain would enable. How's that for you, Petar? Like if you look at the definition and the design and the development and the building of blockchain-enabled projects, any experience you can share that's worthwhile?
So we do a lot of government, actually it's funny what we've settled into, but a lot of government advisory, and the kinds of questions that we get asked is, how can this technology, how does it work, first of all? So we give those sort of 1-minute descriptions of how blockchain, or indeed where we're specializing at the moment is in artificial intelligence. And so I suppose I have the advantage of having a foot in both sides, right? My background, I'm a reformed quantum physicist. So I got to spend some time in Germany working at a particle accelerator and trying to figure out how the world works and pushing atoms around and all those sorts of things. So the thing is that I have the advantage of trying to break things down and identifying the root causes, which is what every scientist does. I didn't realize at the time, but that's a very useful skill to have when you're working in governments and in organizations where they're trying to solve complex challenges, but when you identify them, they're actually quite simple at the root cause. And then when you rebuild the solution out of that, the thing about us that's advantageous as opposed to the entities that we work with is that we're solution agnostic. We don't care what the solution is. If it's blockchain, if it's not blockchain, if it's artificial intelligence, if it's not artificial intelligence, or any other emerging technology, for us it doesn't matter. What matters is that we solve the problem. And I think the focus here when we talk about enterprise blockchain, and I also want to offer, as Hamdan has done, a contrarian view, the blockchain doesn't matter. And we were saying this earlier. We have in this room the collective expertise to fix all of the problems the blockchain can fix. here in the UAE and probably in the rest of the world. And just a note, it's already been mentioned before, but we have gentlemen sitting in the front row. We have the local royalty, and these two gentlemen and others represent the royalty of the region in region and collectively in the world in blockchain. We have those capabilities. You actually give these guys a shout out. Nick Spanos, Austin Alexander, just as two. They deserve it. They deserve it for the reason that they were there and pushed forward on this, and they enabled, and people like them enabled us to have the conversations that we're having, because blockchain may have indeed been lost in the ether if it wasn't for people like them who believed in the absence of others believing in them.
Yep.
But now we get the possibility to sit here on a stage talking about how this technology can be used. So when we work with entities, the real thing that we're trying to do is to rationalize the use case. Without a use case, no technology matters, and that's the truth. And so to come now, given that context, to answer your question, really what we're trying to do is identify those use cases, and we're doing so, ironically, in support of the technologies. Because there's a case that our team is working on at the moment. There's an entity, a single department within a single Dubai government entity, and not a huge department. It uses 400,000 A4 sheets of paper per year. 400,000. Imagine if we look at the Dubai context. In Dubai, we use, in the government collectively, 100 million pieces of paper, corresponding to whatever amount of transactions that looks at. At the moment, we're looking at some cases, I don't believe the numbers, but it's a good idea to see where the decimal point lands, of about 10.4 billion dirham in enterprise value that can be created across the government from all of the savings that can be had from integrating blockchain. Imagine this one department in one entity in the Dubai government using close to 500,000 sheets of paper. Now, you have to rationalize on top of that those 500,000 sheets of paper means someone has to take the piece of paper and give it to the next guy. The time to prepare the piece of paper, obviously there's a contract in that, and it turns out to be a project management system. Now we're looking at developing the solution for that. None of that requires blockchain today. Where it will require blockchain is when they start further expanding, because we've broken that up into phases. The first phase is a very simple phase, and it knocks out about 80% of the problem, right? But the last 20%, the real challenge is going to be when they have to integrate with other Dubai government entities, when they have to get into, for example, unlocking the capabilities of smart contracts so that a person does not have to drive to the other place. I mean, think about it. There was carbon that went into the paper. There's carbon that went into the car. There's carbon that went into the petrol station, into the petrol that went into the car. So all of these things, where we have death by 1,000 cuts in the current systems that we have, from all of the possibilities that we could be saving. And so what we're looking at is rationalizing it in that way. And I think, again, back to the point, having a foot in both camps of understanding to some degree the technology, but more importantly, from my view, understanding and rationalizing the use case, we actually help to promote then blockchain and artificial intelligence and other technologies in the enterprise sector, because we only use them where they're necessary.
Right.
And so the problem is where you use them when they're not necessary, of course, you get a failed project, as some have, and then they'll say, innovation's not what we should be doing. And that's the real killer for me as someone who really is into innovation.
So yeah, like we have an expert here on payments. So obviously Dubai moving towards a paperless economy, 50%, as I understood in 2021, of that needs to be on the blockchain. That's quite an ambitious target. So how do you in a bank look at that and define what makes sense as for a business case to invest in?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what at least what we were discussing in the past is there needs to be a top-down approach, right? I mean, as a financial institution or as any corporation in the UAE, as an individual entity, you'll not be able to achieve something which you would want to achieve unless, and when you're talking about a blockchain as a platform which is decentralized, which talks about having multiple parties come on board, you as an individual entity will not be able to, achieve anything if Eureka, I get this platform and do what with this platform, right? So to also answer one of the points of Hamdan as an idea, probably starts in a I don't know what was the word which you used. Probably in the basement or in a wherever it crops up. But then when you look at any institution, and the head of the institution, he has an objective to achieve, right? And he has a shareholders to answer to. So just because you have one idea doesn't mean he's going to implement it. So there, number one, there needs to, for any successful implementation, you need to have a very strong use case, and which needs to provide you a return on investment, because you're going to go back to the board, you're going to say, hey, I need some investment, and the amount of investments which are happening today on blockchain, everybody wants to get into this bandwagon, right? Without even thinking that, am I going to achieve it? Or, hey, I just need to be on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow, calling myself a cool organization which adapts to the coolest technology and so on and so forth. So from any institution perspective, if there are no returns, if they don't see a value, they're not going to implement, no matter how cool that application is. So coming back to the use case, payments have been talked about a lot, have been touted, have been spoken about a lot. A good part is there are only two institutions which need to be engaged in this particular application. So you have a bank, and then you have a correspondent bank, so that I can quickly make the payment, so that payment gets into the local clearing and gets immediately credited to the beneficiary. So that could be the most easiest one. But then from a financial institution perspective, they're not just dealing with one currency; they're dealing with multiple currency. Would a financial institution want multiple application for multiple corridors? So if and for for several years, or from the nascent stage, all financial institutions have been depending on SWIFT as a messaging platform to send the information out to different banks so that they can settle it in their local clearing house. So I generally feel that it's going to take some time, while you have the likes of Ripple coming in and claiming it. You have several other blockchain service providers who are claiming to provide providing the efficiency. But then I think from a financial institution perspective, payment would rather be the last option, where they would rather want to implement. Digital KYC is something which everybody is interested. Every financial institution would be interested in, because that is where they spend a lot of time. I'm more concerned about the time here rather than the money, because they spend a lot of time. But take an example, a classic use case. If an account needs to be opened, how long does a bank take? We ourselves take some time, because we need to make sure we go through all the checks, all the sanction lists, figure out hey, if the gentleman is the gentleman who's behind the company or not, because you're not seeing the guy. You're just seeing the paper, and you're just believing on those papers. And if the same, and once we open the account, and if the same company goes to another bank, he goes through the same damn process, right? So we would typically need a platform where you have all the banks coming in, you have a regulator on top coming in and stating, okay, that's the trade license, these are the database, what I have the shareholders, I have the directors, that's how he's the person who's authorized to open the accounts, and then you have the banks, viewing it. So makes it much more easier. And that is, we see that, turning into reality now very soon. With DIFC has announced it, a tie-up with a company, a blockchain company, which is, tying up with different banks, having them, information about these companies which are registered in DIFC. And similarly, other regulators across the UAE are also, getting into the similar bandwagon. So then it becomes much more a classic use case for us to invest in, rather than just the payments piece.
Yeah, clear. No, I mean, given the relative nascent stage that we're still in when it comes to blockchain and enterprise as a reality check, I mean, you see a lot of companies that feel the competitive pressure from other enterprises, right? So this company is doing it within this specific industry, so we need to also do something. So with the clients that we work with, we see that there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of private, permissioned blockchains being implemented, but the real premise of blockchain being distributed and being public, we're not really there yet in that phase in enterprise, right? So what I'd like to quickly jump on is like the business models, and this is just for anybody who feels who can contribute. We don't need to go through the sequence. So which business models would you, for the people here in the audience that work in an enterprise or consulting to enterprise, make sense for a blockchain development budget to really be sustainable longer term, right? And not be a 1 or 2 year off? Anybody?
There's one thing I want to mention first, which is a use case for governments at the moment, yeah? Which puts into context what you're saying, because you need to start to think how you're going to operate in that type of environment, yeah? So, there are some governments around the world that are already implemented their national cryptocurrencies, yeah? And also they implemented their identity, and what that means is citizens, companies, yeah, they will end up being identified by a hash key in a central ledger, right? And think like a national cryptocurrency coming as a side chain, yeah? Now you are, every single thing that you spend, yeah? Everything that you earn in that environment is traceable. So governments will be able to collect every single cent of tax, yeah? Plus, every single thing that you produce as an enterprise, it also tracked. So governments will be able to know what a country produces and spends almost in real time. Depends on the speed of blockchain, of course, yeah? So how you as an enterprise are going to operate on that type of environment? What is going to be the business model around that? Because that changes a lot, you know? I can mention some of the countries looking at that, you know? China is looking at that at the moment. Russia is looking at that. And, you know, there's some countries here in the Middle East already thinking about their national cryptocurrency, but to operate within that environment, yeah? So, it's quite tough to actually decide what business model is going to be for you in the future. But what you have to do is start to think how you're going to operate in that type of environment, because that's going to happen, yeah? It's not a question of, it's just a question of time, really, you know?
Yeah.
Could be 1 year, 18 months, or 2 years, but it will happen soon, rather sooner than what people think.
So what I'm sensing, Fernando, is a lot of enterprises may be waiting for that regulatory landscape to be kind of defined and be operational for them to jump on and really start in the public sphere.
Yeah, I do believe
implementing
that, yeah.
I see. We have time for one more additional few, yeah. Jorge?
I do think that there's still a lot of things that need to be addressed. One is proper certification and qualifications. Education is still lacking. I think things like, for example, blockchain interoperability is extremely important. Right now, everybody's creating their blockchain. I mean, this is not a realistic or practical way of building the world. You have to have things that actually fit together. And I think there's another thing that is, I think beyond that, that is important in the context of enterprise applications and solutions. Blockchain plays a role of something like 10, 15% of the entire application. So it's not like when people say, oh, I'm doing a blockchain application. So I go and look and say, oh, that's what you mean. It's very small in the context of the entire application. So it's full stack development, not blockchain development. So blockchain is a component of it. And also there's many elements of what I call on-chain and off-chain, especially when you do things like tokenization. The certification or process of tokenization is as important as the fact that it be on the blockchain. Because although blockchain is a version of the truth, if what we put on the blockchain is not the truth, a wrong version of the truth is out there.
Immutable garbage.
Yeah. Which is also the input towards AI, right?
That is correct, yes.
Wrong data is still going to be
That's why
wrong output.
when you start merging new technologies, like AI has got a serious problem about when you train the AI system model, which is an evolution of data science to some extent, some data is not perfect so you need to validate which of the models are the correct ones. Oh, this is a good one. Tag it as being good. Blockchain is the best technology to actually achieve this tagging of trust.
Blockchain is not
just
solving
very quick
everything.
one on this one. One of the things that
Very quick, yep.
what we need to do when we're implementing AI is start to use blockchain so we can actually track every single decision that the AI makes. Because you will end up in court when you start to have these very complex AIs that are going to cause some sort of accident or death or whatever.
And to learn from it.
So blockchain will be having all of that traceability at the millisecond level or second level. What are the decisions that the AI is making? That has to happen. It has to go into law so that everyone that is creating AIs have to implement that. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very bad thing.
So what I'm hearing is there's a couple of decades of tremendous job opportunity and entrepreneurial opportunity to define this new economy. So I think that is a great challenge on and of itself. I promised 5 minutes of question and answers. If there's none, then we'll fill the panel with a different direction. But we have 5 minutes exactly. So anybody has a question, and also mention to whom you'd like to ask the question. Over there. Yeah. Is there a microphone? Yeah.
Hi, Mazin Gadir from IQVIA, and an external advisor to Dubai Health Authority. My question is to Jorge. Jorge, right?
George.
George, okay. Excellent. George, my question is to scale up in blockchain technologies from your experience. What are the major challenges? You worked with Dubai government, for example, on certain case studies, or you've actually get exposed to, through this panel discussion, to some case studies in the UAE. What are the biggest challenges that is facing Dubai government to actually achieve blockchain-enabled ecosystem, 100%?
I will address your issue of scalability in the context of all blockchains, not just Dubai government. I think blockchain technology does have some issues associated with scalability. For example, the cost of mining. In the context of Bitcoin, maybe this is an acceptable cost. If you take that use case and you bring it, everybody builds their applications using this model, we will not have enough electricity to actually run the applications that we spend a lot of years trying to optimize what goes inside a data center. So the point is, there's new generations of blockchain. We're already talking now even 4.0, 5.0. And the real differentiators between 1, 2, up to 4 or 5 are really mining is much more efficient. That's number one. Number two, blockchain now achieves over 1 million transactions per second. And you're going to say, wow, 1 million is a lot of transactions. Well, actually, not really, because if you want to implement blockchain in the context of a smart city and IoT devices, 1 million transactions per second is not going to do it. So we didn't solve yet 100% of that problem. And the third one I think is very important is the flexibility of consensus mechanisms. In the context of business enterprises, there's not one size of consensus that fits all of them. So you need to have a blockchain that allows you to use the right consensus mechanism for the business problem we're trying to solve.
Thank you, George. Any other questions? Yeah, gentleman at the back.
Yeah, my question is, I'm from logistics and supply chain. So what resources are available for supply chain for small enterprises? Because they also want to get on board on this bandwagon, but how to get the resources?
Yeah, so I think we've heard from Fernando that food tracking, right? Like getting back all the way to the source. Like, is this food organic, yes or no? Where does it come from? Chemicals being injected. I think that was one of the use cases being mentioned. Anybody else?
We have actually one of the most successful implementations of supply chain is actually here in Dubai. I will not name the names. I'll name the name of the company that is actually using the technology, and then the rest you can find out by yourselves. It's a company known as TriStar, which is a massive logistics company around the world. It was implemented by a local company. And what allows you to do is TriStar, as a very large company that ships goods around the world to camps and things like that, has used blockchain technology to have substantial savings and enable identification of trust in their entire supply chain mechanism. So this is a massive transformation, which means that you can take this big system and take a chunk of it and bring it to your small enterprise for a fraction of the cost and result in substantial savings to your own business.
One more. I think Nick has a question.
The boss.
You know we love you, Nick.
This question's for Dr.Petar. So on the Hyperloop, I saw that there's a funding mechanism that's being utilized right now called bonding curve.
The
Bonding curve.
bonding curve.
That's funding one of the Hyperloop projects. I'm not sure what the how the Hyperloop
It may not be ours.
network exists, but I think it's an Elon Musk project, right?
Yep.
And he's using bonding curves, which, by the way, we invented.
I'm not surprised. So on that quick point, a couple of things that are interesting about Hyperloop. The thing is that it's technologically, and this is coming from someone who worked in the space for quite some time, it exists on 3 technologies, all of which were invented or discovered about 150 years ago. So I often get the question, will it really work? Yes, it will really work.
It's like the tube at the bank.
Exactly. Well,
vacuum.
Slightly different because there's a pressure differential between the front and the back, and so it pushes it forward. If anyone wants to have a chat about Hyperloop, I'll explain it. But to your point, what was necessitated was a new kind of funding mechanism that essentially fractionally distributed the cost of the creation of it, because fundamentally the challenge of building something as audacious as a new mode, the 5th mode of transportation, as it's called, was the fact that it's challenging from a funding perspective. And so even in its creation, I have a contract with Hyperloop, but I'm not employed directly by Hyperloop, so I'm actually paid through a different mechanism. The development, the creation, the payment of employees, and now to your point, the implementation and finally the payment of passengers on it needed to be realized in a fundamentally new way simply because of the expense. So, and to all of the points, and I think it kind of summarizes what we're talking about here, the disruption of this technology is precisely what will fundamentally displace what exists today. And if you look at a historical account of so many technologies, they were displaced by things that were fundamentally better, because what they did was serve the value context of the problem that they were solving much better. So, from a horse to a better horse, which was a car, to the hotel, a better version of a hotel is not a hotel. A better version of a social media site is not a social media site, for example. And as we move forward, the newest version of a mobility technology is not an aeroplane, as I have clients who are in the mobility space as we're doing. So to come back to this point, the payment mechanisms or the digital identity mechanisms or the fractional ownership mechanisms are what's interesting and what fundamentally will displace. And Hyperloop happens to be one of them. So it's very exciting. I look at blockchain not from its own account.
The bonding curve is what I tried to explain on the screen yesterday. It's on zap.org, and your guys are all over our GitHub. But it's okay, we're open source.
It's not us.
But,
and when
do
we
I get a free ride on the Hyperloop at least?
We'll make sure you're one of the
I
first.
think we can go parabolic on the Hyperloop. I'm seeing 2 red zeros, so I need to cut it off here. But feel free to continue the conversation offline.
We'll do that.
I'd like to thank all of you and for having asked the questions, and for the esteemed panelists over here for having shared their views. And I hope this was helpful for giving you a little bit of more insight into where enterprises and governments are going. So thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And one
Thank
important
you very much.